Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Capital Spotlight. Today we have a very dear friend and special person on the podcast. We have Sadie Knight. Some of you may know her as Sadie Lackey. She got married recently. Sadie works at the National Corn Growers Association, but even cooler than that, she has her own foundation that she started recently called the 118 Foundation. So we'll dive into that, connect as a partner with the 118 Foundation. We really want to know more about her story and we get into that, so tune in. Well, we are here with Sadie Knight, recently married, so I can't believe I got that right, actually. You work over at the National Corn Growers Association as Director of Grassroots and Political Strategy. So, hello, Sadie. Hello. Sadie Lackey, some people might know you as, now Sadie Knight. Hello, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. I'm excited to be here, and I, too, am shocked that you got my name right the first time. David and I are friends for, oh my gosh, like 3 years now, for a long time. And I was Lackey the whole time, but now I'm Knight. There
was a little like that almost came off of my tongue, but stopped it just in time. So we are so thankful to have you on today. As you said, we've been friends for a while, but you were one of the first people that came to mind when we decided to start a podcast because you're fun, you have cool experiences, and you would be a really exciting guest to have on. So tell us a little bit about your career and what you've been up to here in DC and before. Where are you from?
Yeah. So if you can't tell, I'm from Georgia. I grew up in a super small town, and I know so many people say that, and I'm not going to try to outroll anyone that's listening to this podcast, but I graduated with like 130 people. We had one high school. I grew up in Ellijay, Georgia, which is the apple capital of Georgia, so we have the Apple Festival in the fall, and It looks a bit more like Vermont, where my husband is from, but it's just the South. As south as you can get, really. Nice. And so graduated from the University of Georgia in 2020 with a degree in agricultural communications, and then moved up to DC shortly after in June of 2020, which is the worst time to be in Washington, DC. Like, literally, it was the worst time. DC. We moved into an apartment we had never toured with my best friend Autumn and I, with two girls that we met on Facebook. So like classic DC, meeting your roommates on Facebook, but with the twist of not knowing exactly what your apartment looks like or what you're going to do in a shutdown city. But that was an experience in itself. I worked at the USDA in the Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement. Nice. Really loved the work. I got to do a lot of youth outreach, veteran outreach, and young farmer outreach. Also did a lot with the Farmers to Families Food Box program, which was a pandemic relief project that USDA worked on. So loved it. It was a great job. Like a lot of folks in this town, I had to find a new one. And I went to work in the Senate. I worked in communications. Did that for about a year and a half, decided the Senate wasn't for me. Not bashing any Senate friends listening, but I'm more of a House mouse myself. Went over to the House and worked for Representative Jerry Carl for a little over a year, and then went over to the National Corn Growers Association. Started off there as the manager of Grassroots and Leadership Development. Great opportunity to get my feet wet in the association world. It's much different than working for the federal government.
We will get to that for sure.
Yeah, we'll get to that. And then now I serve as the director of Grassroots and Political Strategy, which is a ton of fun, and I'm excited to talk about it. For
sure. I think you have such a cool, well-rounded background that really allows anyone who's worked in DC politics to understand at least part of your story, and it allows the staffers listening to get a picture of what it looks like to work off the Hill. But to take a step back, I think something people don't realize until you experience the South is that agriculture is a major at schools, and like you can major in agriculture communications or other different studies inside of that. And I did not realize that until I worked in a Georgia office, and one of my interns was an AgCom major at UGA. She was awesome, but didn't know that exists. Didn't know that was a whole world. But hey, that's the South, I guess, right?
Who did you work for?
Buddy Carter.
Oh, I knew that. You told me that. That's cool.
He was a sweet man. I liked him a lot.
Yeah, he's very sweet. So yeah, that's one thing that a lot of people don't know about agriculture, is that it's not just farming, which is in and of itself a very honorable career, but you can be a part of the industry through communications, business, all types of different strategy. And so, like I think where I grew up in the South and the Midwest, and I mean, further out, agriculture's everywhere, right? Yeah. But there's just so much opportunity for people in ag. And DC, the DC ag family is like literally the best.
Tight bunch for sure.
Very tight. Very tight. It's the best.
We love that. So tell us a little bit about National Corn Growers Association.
Yeah.
For those who can't figure it out by its name, tell us what it is.
The National Corn Growers Association represents 30,000 dues-paying corn grower members, but also represents the interest of corn growers nationwide who pay to checkoffs.
Gotcha. And what is a checkoff for those who don't know?
Yeah, that's a good question. So across several different commodities, growers will pay a very small percentage of what they sell toward a checkoff. It's pennies on the dollar. So they will, which is pennies on the dollar, but adds up to a lot because growers sell a lot of their product. Yeah. And so all that to say, they will pay toward the checkoff, and the checkoff's job is to promote and support the industry. Now, there's a big difference between what a checkoff does and what an association does. Right. Checkoffs cannot lobby, but associations can. So our association is structured a little differently in that we have checkoff dollars from our state partners that we just use for promotion, like building a market for corn and educating and all that goes into that. And research. We do a lot. So that's the checkoff money. And then we have money from our dues and money from industry partners that we use for government relations and lobbying.
Got it.
So that's kind of the separation of the two, but that's how it's set up. But we represent the American corn industry, really. So when you think of brands like cotton, fabric of our lives, we're corn, America's crop.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we like corn.
We love corn.
I feel like that's a great branding, America's crop, you know? Glad you took it before anyone else could.
Oh, 100%.
So what does your day look like on that side of the political world? So I know your title is like Grassroots and Political Strategy. Does that mean you're lobbyists? Like, what does that mean exactly for people that don't know the fancy terms of the private sector?
Yeah, so there's a lot of differences between the private and public sectors. Like, for sure, there's differences. When you get into the nonprofit world, though, the idea of one person wearing many hats isn't different.
Fair enough.
Every person who works at a nonprofit is probably juggling 100 different tasks, whether it be like a side project they're passionate about or just the fact that they're low on people because it's a nonprofit and you got to do a lot. I'm kind of in the boat of both of those. So there's pieces of my job that aren't in my job description that I get to work on that I love. And then there's other pieces that, like, we just need someone to handle the appropriations portfolio. For sure. So I lobby, I handle our PAC and political strategy, which is a lot of event planning, a lot of strategy, a lot of following campaigns, just anything to do with politics. But honestly, I just do a lot of fundraising and event planning, and it's a lot of fun. And then on the grassroots side, I work with the other half of my team, Grace. We work together to put together any type of outreach or strategy to farmers to get them to activate on issues. So for all the LCs listening, all those mini form letters that you get in that talk about corn, that originated with Grace and I. And the non-form letters probably originated from Grace and I, working with our growers to personalize those messages. But that grassroots system, we're a grassroots organization. We just help growers get more plugged in with Capitol Hill. So there's that piece of the job. I also do a lot of communications work, actually, which I love. I have a comms background, and I love comms. Didn't really love the press piece of my old job.
That's hard.
More of the creative part. And so in this job, we have a campaign called our Corn Reputation Campaign, and it's where we work with a firm to build out advertisements in strategic places to promote the corn brand. Okay. So if you all go to the airport at any time, you will probably see an NCGA poster or advertisement up somewhere talking about the corn industry. And that's a part of that program, and I get to be a part of the strategy there.
Cool.
So my day, to answer your question, is hectic. It's hectic.
Yeah, it sounds like no 2 days are the same. But speaking of passion projects on the side of nonprofits, let's transition into your passion project or calling. But the 118 Foundation, this is something you founded, almost a year ago, right? Jeez, coming up on the 1 year anniversary. So tell us about the 118 Foundation and when you founded it.
Oh yeah, so 118 Foundation. So part of the story, my story that I didn't tell earlier, is that a couple of years ago I got diagnosed with cancer. I got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was stage 4, super nasty. But Hodgkin's lymphoma is a type of cancer that is very common with young women. We don't know why. We don't know what causes it. There's no linkages to literally anything. I'm not saying, ladies go lay in the tanning beds and overproduce food. Like, that's not what I'm saying, but it's a type of cancer where they just don't know anything about it. Yeah. And so the treatment is super intense for stage 4 and for a lot of blood cancers. It's actually kind of funny. We saw Majority Leader Steve Scalise get diagnosed around the same time I did. Chairman G.T. Thompson. It was weird. It was like for a while there was a lot of folks in town
for sure
getting cancer, and I unfortunately was a part of that class. So had Hodgkin's lymphoma, 6 months of treatment, and in those 6 months, I felt a calling to start this foundation. Faith is very important to me. I don't shy away from talking about it. I just felt like God led me to start this foundation, and He made it very apparent in many different ways. And I could spend all day talking about that, but to the point of your question, the 118 Foundation serves young people who have or are still overcoming cancer. When I was sick, there wasn't a lot of resources for me because I don't know how to say this without being blunt. It's usually old people with cancer. Yeah, it's normally old people. Yeah. It's like normally old people. Or there's a lot of help and resources for kids because they're kids. They need the extra love. Yeah, for sure. And what we've forgotten, there's a gap. I call it a gap of love, but there's a gap of support for people ages 18 to 39 who have cancer, because you don't look at me and think, oh yeah, she's gonna get cancer. Sure. Yeah. So all that to say, that's how the 118 Foundation was born. Our primary form of support is providing cold hard cash to young people, because I think everyone listening to this podcast probably realizes the reality of being in your 20s and starting your career, and starting a career in DC where it costs $500 to take a breath. And that, coupled with thousands and thousands of dollars of life-saving medicine, it can get really tricky. Sure. Actually, in the cancer community, the 18 to 39-year-old community has the highest rate of bankruptcy. Yeah, and that bankruptcy is linked right back to debt. I'm not shy about sharing this either. My treatment put me in $10,000 of debt, and I had insurance. I had good insurance.
That's just so frustrating.
It's really frustrating. But I don't know. I got I had to do it to survive. There's no other way to put it. Yeah. And so all that to say, we believe that sickness is not anyone's story. Our motto is that we're committed to the comeback. We're committed to helping young people get back on their feet. And sometimes having that relief from debt is what takes you to get there. We do encourage all of our grant recipients, though, to do something special with the money. Sure. We recently gave a grant to a gal in Iowa, and she wrote in her application that she was going to use the money for medical bills. She has a type of cancer that I think she was diagnosed 3 or 4 years ago and still receiving treatment. It's just one that they got to continue to monitor. But she put in her application that she wants to take her family out to dinner.
Nice.
And so that's what people are doing with this money, and that's what young people, talking from experience, is what they need. But in addition to that, every single grant recipient that I've talked to, because I've all called them off, got to know them, like
For sure.
bring them into the fam, if you will. And every single one of them said, I've never felt seen before until I saw your website. And they said, the most important thing that we need, other than, help financially, we need community.
For sure.
And so that's something that my board and I are mulling over now, building community around those recipients. So
Absolutely.
if it's like a connect group,
Yep.
but seriously, it is like a connect of sorts. Like, how can we bring all these young people together? Is it a group message? Is it a Facebook group? Like, what is it?
For sure.
Just so that they have community.
Yeah, and I think to that point, there's so many different branches I want to take this conversation, but off of that, something that's super important is that community aspect, whether it's around cancer survivors or people going through it, or you're just trying to survive in DC. Like, you need that community. It's so important, but you want to figure out ways to get people who maybe are on the hill as well, who have had a similar experience and battled cancer. For staffers out there who may have had that experience or are going through it currently, or anyone in DC listening, how could they get in touch with you to get involved in that world?
Yeah. And I want to answer your question, but I want to give you a little bit of a story on that while we're talking about it. One of our first and biggest supporters was a woman who had cancer when she was in her 20s and starting her career in DC, and she's like in her 50s or 60s now. And she told me, she said, I believe in what you're doing. I'm going to invest in everything going on. But she said, when I was that young, the laws were different, labor laws were different. She didn't even tell her employer.
Jeez.
She was like, I didn't even feel comfortable telling my employer because I was afraid to lose my job. And so I know for a fact there are people our age in DC who have dealt with cancer, who have had cancer scares, who've had family members die from cancer or be affected from cancer. And then I also know that there's our older friends who had cancer and literally had to hide it.
For sure.
And so I think our focus with 118, especially in DC and our local community, is to broaden our reach and bring everyone in, whether you want to support the foundation or if you just want to talk about how crappy cancer is.
Yeah.
And so how you can get in touch with me. Okay. 118foundation.org is our website, but my email for the foundation is sadie@118foundation.org. It's super simple.
We'll make sure to put that in, as podcast people say.
Yes.
We'll put it in the description below.
We'll put it in the description below. But I really want to connect with people in the district who are just trying to figure out how to overcome cancer. I mean, I know people, my grandma had cancer, 12 years ago, and she'll still talk to me about it. Not because I had cancer and we bond over it now, but because it takes a toll on your body and your heart, and we should support each other.
Yeah, and anytime you go through those tragic moments in life, it's really stunning, and it's really easy to feel alone in that process. And so obviously what you're trying to do is just let people know, hey, there are other people around you that have gone through similar things.
Yeah.
And even if it's not, hey, apply for a grant, get some money to go through this process, but just to know other people in the area who have done something similar or are going through something similar.
Oh, yeah. One more story on that before we move to the next question here. Whenever I was diagnosed, it was the hugest God thing, one of the biggest God things that's happened to me. So I had a mentor who I went to for all my career advice. Oh my gosh, she's so sound-minded. She's so commonsensical. She was just, and she had the job I wanted. I wanted to be her. So anyways, I didn't know, but we were working together to try to get me a job on the, talking to such and such, getting coffee with such and such, and then blah, blah, blah. So we were doing that, trying to get me a new job on the Hill, kind of refocused on the issue area I was interested in. And we were supposed to meet for coffee, and I texted her, golly, but I texted her and I said, hey, I can't weird thing just happened. I found out I got cancer and I'm feeling pretty sick. And she was like, whoa, what? Like, you have cancer? And so she called me and she was like, Sadie, I'm a cancer survivor.
Jeez.
And turns out that she had the same form of cancer that I had when she was a teenager. And I remember, so little cancer education. Whenever you, most of the time, you can have, this is kind of gross, sorry guys. Whenever you receive chemo, you can get it through an IV, but most of the time the literal poison is too strong for your veins. And so they'll put a port in your chest.
Gotcha.
And right before I went into surgery for my port, she sent me a picture of her port scar. And I just remember that was like, that just comforted me so much.
For sure.
So much. So anyways, another point to why community matters.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure in that moment, it took a little bit of weight off of your shoulders.
Oh, yeah.
In the same way relief from debt can, or the same way that like going on a vacation or just like stop thinking about your sickness for a moment can.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's so important about what you're doing is, like when I started Connect, I went into a lot of personal debt to get this off the ground. Like I had a great credit score before this. It was over 800. And then it's like, boom, like in the 400s. I've got it back. Don't worry, guys.
Yeah, it's insane.
But the stress I felt of knowing like I have this debt on me that I have to figure out how to get out of, it was like sickening at times, and it just felt so heavy on you. And so like that's building a business. It's one thing, but like to be sick, to be fighting for your life, and at the same time knowing like I'm adding debt to myself, like how do I get out of this? That's such a heavy weight. So any way that you can like fix that burden is just so awesome that you're doing that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And another piece to that is like, when you're in your 20s or 30, I mean, early 30s, I mean, I don't want to underscore young people. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the life experience you don't have.
Yeah.
I learned so much about health insurance in like a month's time. I had no business knowing everything. I mean, I guess I did. Everyone should understand your health insurance. But I just, as a 25-year-old, I had no business having to understand all of that. And understanding how billing works and like, yes, how debt collectors work and like all of that. It's a lot. And when you're young, like you just don't have the life experience to prepare for that. And another thing too, like my family, like we didn't grow up with a lot of money. And so financial literacy was very foreign to me. And I don't like saying that bad things, that you learn things from going through tragedy, because it's kind of sour to say it that way. But like one of the important things that I learned from having cancer is financial literacy. Like I learned the importance of like balancing my 401k and health insurance and what is the best health insurance plan, what's the best bang for your buck, how to better budget. Because growing up, like we were just scraping to get by. And then when I had cancer, I was like, oh, I need to rethink how I spend my money and how I budget. So it's a lot of growing up really quick.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And so you battle cancer while still working, and obviously it gives you a little bit of room to like do what you need to do, but you still work during that time, felt the calling to build 118 Foundation, start that process. So let's take cancer out of it for a second and just say like, how were you able to pursue that calling while still having a full-time job that you want to commit everything to, but at the same time, you know you're meant to be like building something else, and you're not the only person out there. There are other people that want to figure out how to balance both. So what are your recommendations?
I have a lot. But I do want to fast forward a little bit. So let's be real. When I had cancer, yes, I worked and I had a lot going on and I learned a lot. My office took care of me.
For sure.
I did not work at the level that I work at now, not because of my title, but because they took care of me. To give a little background there, I decided to leave the Hill whenever I was diagnosed, not because I didn't think my office would take care of me. They were ready to set up shop in my apartment, and they were ready to do like the work from home. Like I could just answer phone calls or whatever. Like they were willing to let me do anything I wanted to do.
That's great.
I didn't do that, or I decided not to take them up on the offer because I knew that we felt really good about my boss becoming an appropriator.
Gotcha.
I was really interested in appropriations, and like they knew that I liked ag too, and I was working on ag issues for him, and I was going to be teed up to do a lot of good work in his office.
Yeah.
And I would have been so sad not being able to show up to the office, not being able to staff him for committee. I just would have been heartbroken. And so really that was a mental health move for me to move off of the hill and go to something a little different. So all that to say, I was really well taken care of by my office. And that's the first step, I think, whenever you want to expand your life outside of your home and your work and do something else, is to first make sure like you're in a good place with both of those things. Sure. If you're not in a good place with work, if your team's not good, if your office isn't good, we've all been there. Everyone's been in a weird work experience. But if you don't have a safe harbor at work, if you don't have a safe harbor at home, then going off to do adding something else to your plate is going to feel a little reckless.
For sure.
So make sure your home's good, make sure your office life is good, and then explore. You need to have safe harbor somewhere. And I did. I had it at NCGA. I still do. We've had so many supporters come from my team. I'm not like knocking on my team's office doors asking for money. Like, I'm not doing that. They have just wanted to support 118, which has been really cool. I don't have to go beg money from them. And so check that out first. Make sure your life is steady. Make sure there's not any crazy hurricanes coming. The second thing that I would say, in addition to that, is, and I've said it 100 times, if something matters to you, you make time for it.
For sure.
And you see that in any piece of your life. If you're a runner and you like marathons, like you want to compete in marathons, you're going to wake up early so you can run. Or you're going to stay up late so you can run. You're going to take care of your body. If you want a dog, you're going to make time to take out your dog and play with your dog.
You know all about that.
I know all about that, raising a puppy myself. So if it matters to you, if you really want something, you make time for it. I make time for 118. I feel guilty sometimes that I don't make enough time, and I think that's going to be any part of my life ever.
That always happens.
Always. But I make time for it. This evening, I'm going to finish up what I need to do for work, and then I'm going to do 118 stuff. And that's just how it works. But in addition to that, like, you have to make time for it, but you have to also remember what's most important to you. Whenever I started 118, one of my best friends, Autumn, is on my board. And the first thing I told her when I asked her to be on the board was, 118 will never come before our friendship. And if there's ever a time that you have a side project or a passion project, or you're trying to build something and it becomes your God, or it becomes your best friend, or it becomes your spouse, then it's time to step away.
For sure.
There's so much more important things in this life. No matter how called you are to something, your family, your faith, your well-being tops it all.
Yeah, priority is important. Work can't be the number one thing in your life. So preaching to the choir and preaching to every single person listening right now. So just got to figure that out somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it's so hard, at least in my position. It was Connect was my baby, right? Like, it was what I felt called to, and so I just devoted all of my attention to it and all my care to it. And then I'd be like, why am I so stressed out or drained or unhappy? And it's like, my priorities are in the wrong place. And so it's a hard balancing act, and you can do it right for a while, and then you forget what you were doing, and then you got to get back to it. It's all part of the process.
Yeah. There's a season for everything, and I just remind myself of that. Next year, I already have it mapped out in my mind. I know when it's going to be more 118 intensive. I know, like, when my best friend's getting married, that's going to be my priority. But again, like, God, my husband, Brandon, they come first.
For sure.
So.
Yeah, so I think it's It's been really cool to see you do this for the last couple of years. We've had a front row seat. We got to see your launch event on January 18th.
Sponsored the launch event.
Hey, now.
By the way.
We don't need any of that. Relax. But so it's becoming such an important part of your life, but you are the traditional political type of staffer in DC. So let's talk more about the trade association world and the admin world, right? You've gotten to do so many different parts of this process. So for those people who have only worked on the Hill, what does the other side look like? How is it the same? How is it different?
I would say, whenever I worked on the Hill, I mostly worked in junior staffer positions. Yeah. And so when it came to like politics and the campaign, I did the GOTV thing, went down there. I went to the district plenty of times, went with the boss to pick up checks and stuff like that, stuff we're not supposed to talk about. That's not bad at all, and I'll get to that. But did all those things as a junior staffer because I was awarded really great opportunities, but also recognized that the fundraisers, the PAC events, all of that normally reserved for senior staff. Sure. And so coming over off the Hill, I was hit in the face with politics. And I was like, holy smokes, this is why when such and such group came in, I knew I had to meet with them. And that sounds so sneaky, but the more that I learned about it and really got into political fundraising and working with campaigns and working with fundraisers, it's different than what it looks like at face value, right? And so I think the biggest piece that's different is that how you interact with your constituency. So for us, when I go to a corn grower and I say, hey, dude, I need $100 for the pack. I don't really say that. It takes a little bit more warming up and maybe a gift or something. I don't know.
Quite the sales pitch.
Yeah. Hey, dude, I need $100. But when they give me that money, I am entrusted with their investment in the pack to ensure that our brand and our people and our priorities have a front row to whatever member we have on our slate. That is a huge responsibility. Yeah. Corn growers are some of the hardest working people I've ever met. I mean, farmers in general, hardest working people I've ever met, and I'm so proud to work for them. So when you're off the Hill, the constituency looks different, but the weight of serving them is no different. Yeah. I don't work for Alabama's 1st District anymore. I don't work for the state of Louisiana anymore. I work for corn growers, and how I treat them, how I serve them, I hold them to the same respect. A little bit more sometimes. And I have the same duties to them in my role. The difference of the political piece, though, is being on the other side of the table, being on the other side of fundraisers, being on the other side of the campaign trail, is vastly different. We work to, as I've mentioned, build our brand, make sure that we are known to members of Congress. But so much of our work, 99% of our work, is just building a relationship with them and making sure that our constituency, their stories are shared, that corn growers, their stories are shared, and that, whenever Chairwoman Stabenow comes to one of our events, she knows who Harold Woolley is from Minnesota, who's our president, by the way, and can pick them out in a crowd. For sure. We're building relationships for our growers. We are building our brand. And I think that's the main part that's different on the political side. On the other hand, when you're on the Hill, you have lobbyists breaking down the doors. You have 50 meetings a day. You have one-pagers and priorities shoved in your face. And it's just learning constantly, taking in and absorbing so much information. We're creating the information. We're creating the brand. Hill staffers are absorbing it, hopefully. At least that's what we try.
And so I think as a former Hill staffer, that gives you the most value is to understand what's going to stand out to a staffer or to a member of Congress. So for anyone who's looking to make that jump to the private sector or to the trade association world, I think that's a really important step, is understanding what it's like on the inside. Yeah. What any advice on like what is it like to message towards the people you used to be, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm going to give the most DC answer in the book. If you're a Hill staffer and you want to go to a trade association and you want to lobby, the easiest way to get your message across is to build relationships and to be able to call your friends and like give them information and help strategize with them. You know, like I mentioned before, I work on our appropriations portfolio, and as I submitted those requests, maybe some of the people listening to this podcast received my request, but a lot of the requests that I sent in were to friends.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's what got us money. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that the person receiving my email and receiving my request knew I was a reliable source, knew that what I was asking of them was not outlandish and would be well stewarded. Money would be well stewarded. And so I'd already built that trust. And so if you're looking to transition off the Hill, build trust with the people around you, make friends, get the coffees, get the everything, download the Connect app, whatever you got to do to make those friends, because it'll serve you on the other side. The other piece of that is like on and off the Hill in whatever job you are in, always approach a situation as a student.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, I filled the shoes of in the job that I'm at now, I have filled the shoes of one of the probably, I don't know, most well-seasoned political strategists in the ag industry, like in the game. Okay, like she is so smart. I still call her all the time and ask for her opinion and ask for her perspective. And I filled her shoes, and that was daunting. I've been in DC for like 4-5 years now. Like, it was so daunting. But every time that I go into work, every time I open up my laptop, I'm not afraid to ask a question. I'm not afraid to ask for help, and I'm not afraid to dig a little deeper to make sure I understand things. So that would be my 2 pieces of advice there.
Yeah, I think that's such a great piece too. When you're doing these coffees, when you're trying to build relationships, that genuine curiosity is so important. People pick up on that, they appreciate it, and it makes things feel less transactional. So,
Yeah.
And to that point, what's your advice if it's so important to build relationships? How do you do that in a genuine way that isn't transactional?
I would do your research on people. Like, figure out what matters to their boss, what matters to them, and like just get to know them. You know, if you have a golden doodle and they have a golden doodle, like take a sec and talk about it. That's just being human. That's not a trick. That's not a skill. That's just being human. But just be human with people first, and then just figure out, you know, what matters to them, their office and their boss, and how you can help each other. So for instance, this is a very technical example, but going back to that lobbying piece of my job, our appropriations request is for aflatoxin research. People's eyes kind of glaze over when I say aflatoxin research, but then when right. But then when I explain what aflatoxin is and how deadly and yes, carcinogenic, no irony here that I lobby for eradicating a carcinogenic toxin. But whenever I explain like how deadly it is, how carcinogenic it is, and like say this could hurt our families, this is hurting our corn growers in this way, and find pieces of the staffer that I'm talking to, what their member cares about, what their boss cares about. Whenever you dig deeper is what I'm trying to say. Aflatoxin research doesn't sound so boring.
Yeah, I think it's super important to do your research. It can feel kind of stalker-y sometimes of like, why am I doing this? Or it could feel like you're dating someone.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it is super important to walk in and be like, hey, like I saw that you went to the same school or you have this interest. And it doesn't make people go like, how did you figure that out? Unless you looked up something really weird and figured it out some weird way.
Yeah.
But it makes people go, oh, okay, like they took the time, you know? And a lot of times to get a yes for a coffee or something like that, it's good to stand out with like, hey, I did my research. Here's a little nugget.
Oh, for sure. And when you can just like find that common bond that I mentioned, like the golden doodle. And I'm saying that because everyone and their brother has a golden doodle in the District of Columbia, but I have a Bernedoodle, so that's different. But all that to say, like when you can just find something in common, like I'm from the South. Like there's no denying it. And I hang out with like Midwestern 60-year-old men all the time. Tell me how that works. We find commonality, like we find things in common. I was talking to one of said elder Midwestern gentlemen today, and I told him that I recently got married. Like I shared that part of myself, and he told me how he and his wife been married for 50 years, and we bonded over that. And so I think DC can kind of dilute the human in you sometimes. But
yeah, I feel like you're almost encouraged to be this staffer robot of you wear this outfit, you do this thing, that's who you are. And we lose out on all the individual and interesting personalities that there are in this town because we're trying to fit some certain monolith that someone else has said, like, this is what a staffer is like. And I don't think that works all that well. And then you've got someone like yourself who comes in and you are yourself. And people are, you're magnetic, right? Like people want to talk to you. People want to know more about you because of that. So on that transition, who are you outside of work?
Who am I? Okay. Well, I'm now Sadie Knight, as we first started off the podcast with that. Just had to flaunt that a little bit more. Recently married to Brandon, who doesn't work in DC at all. He works in construction management. Great guy. 10 out of 10. But it's funny. He works in construction management, but he's probably more politically inclined than me. And not to divulge my political leanings, but he's probably further to the right than I would have ever thought a person from Vermont would ever be. Recently married. We have a Bernedoodle, as I mentioned, named Acadia. First baby, my entire life. He is my entire life. I'm really active at Waterfront Church here in Navy Yard. I say here because we're in Navy Yard recording. Really active at church. Love to be outside, love to travel. If you haven't figured this out either, I love being from the South. Why
do you love being from the South?
Because it's the South. I mean, no, not everything's better in the South. No, the South is just beautiful and the people are nice. The food is good. You can go to the beach in the South. You can go to the mountains in the South. You can stand in the middle of a pine tree forest that spans for miles in the South. Whatever you like, really. So
as someone who's been blessed to be invited over to your place for dinner and experience your cooking, is that something that you are just good at, or do you like to do it, you know?
Oh, I love to cook. My pappy, yes, I call my grandparents Nanny and Pappy.
My grandparent was a Pappy too.
I love that. I love a Pappy. So Pappy, he cooked a lot, and I just grew up cooking with him. And then whenever I went to college, I keep talking about Autumn. She's, like I said, she's my best friend.
Autumn is awesome.
Autumn is also awesome. Autumn, she also loved to cook, and that's what we kind of bonded over and built our friendship over that. But I started on my Instagram a new highlight reel of everything that I'm cooking.
Ooh, okay.
Last night, I made a beef roast with garlic Parmesan potatoes, but it was a bourbon brown sugar sauce. It was really good. But no, I love that. And I also love that, like, this is so cheesy, but like food brings people together, you know? For sure. It really does. And it just, I don't know, nurturing people like that, making sure they're well fed. Yeah. It means something.
If there's any like ulterior motive to reach out to you, I encourage everyone to reach out to Sadie just so you can maybe one day get invited over to dinner. It is worth it. Put in the time, even if it's a con.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I'm married for a reason.
Definitely do not look at her Instagram highlights if you're hungry and have no access to food.
Yeah,
It'll just tempt you too much. But Sadie, thank you for coming on. It was truly a pleasure. Thanks for joining the Capital Spotlight podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in to the Capital Spotlight podcast. If you enjoyed the show today, be sure to subscribe to our channels to stay updated on our latest releases and get our shows early. Share the show with your friends and rate us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. For more from Connect, follow us on our social media, Connect app, CNCT app, and subscribe to our daily newsletters and check out our website. It's capitalconnect.com. Capital is spelled with an O. See you next time.